We're taught that we can overcome pain. We push past pain all the time, and it's a mental state. And so if we train ourselves to associate pain with information and knowledge and learning, then we can start looking at pain as another source of growth. And so things that hurt then become a challenge as opposed to, oh, that's painful, let me avoid it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's, oh, damn, I've been through this before. That hurts. But what am I going to do differently this time?
Welcome to Living Once Twice, a lifestyle design and personal adventure podcast. My name is Justin. Come with me as I'm here to help you chart your course for creating the fulfilling life you desire. Join me as every Wednesday we'll dive into the inspiring guest stories, remarkable science, and useful strategies to help you create the momentum you need to take action towards designing your dream life. Remember, your dream life is waiting for you. It's time to go for it. You deserve it. Greetings all, and welcome to Living Once Twice. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I'm very excited to bring on today's guest, Denzel Herrera-Davis. Denzel is a life coach, business consultant, wellness advocate, and founder of Create the Space. Create the Space, which is an organization with a mission to bring mental health, wellness, and community healing to the forefront of awareness for people of color through shared vulnerability and increased access to mental health coverage. Denzel, welcome to the show. How are you, brother?
Brother, man. Hey, yo, I'm tempted to ask you to do that again because it felt so good to be welcomed to the space. Thank you so much for that introduction, brother. And I'm doing well, man. If I were any better, I would be you right now, but that's just not possible.
Hey. Yo, I hope people are just going to understand the energy. This is one of those episodes where I wish I could just be in the audience and just watch and not have the job of doing this interview. But man, before we dive into your inspiring journey, the insightful and impactful and inspiring work you're doing, I want to give the folks context. I met Denzel about a year ago through my therapist, Nia Ridgel, through her Restoring the King platform. And then Denzel, you came into the space, you were a guest speaker, and bro, your journey just clicked and resonated with me so deeply. And just before we hit record, I was starting to share with you my own journey of taking time to myself to really tune out the outside inputs, distractions, and really go inward. And you know, what you did, you presented on so many levels. You also gave me an opportunity, which plays into this conversation, to speak on Create the Space with some of the other guys, Paul and Cam and others. Yeah. And since then, bro, it's just been on in all the spaces that you've created. So I want to just start and give much thanks, gratitude, and appreciation for you because, man, you helped fill a void that I didn't have the community of men to go through this journey with. And like I said, this outlet and support system you've developed has just been impactful. So just got to give you that gratitude first.
Damn, man, that sounds, oh, sorry if I'm not allowed to curse, but that sounds like music to my ears, man. Just being able to hear those words are the motivation for me to get up and do what we do on a regular basis. And it's really that simple for me. And you mentioned one thing about, you know, filling a void in the community. And so many of the people that are a part of Creative Space, I talk about, we all have this question at some point, but we haven't even formulated the question. We just know we're seeking for an answer. And so much of that answer is just found in our own reflection, right? If we're able to see ourselves enough in the reflection of others, then we can find ourselves. And so Create the Space has really just been that opportunity. So for so many people to just dive in and say, hey, here I am. Now reflect, please.
I want to reflect. That's exactly the starting point because you've got a lot of insight to share with our guests about rewriting our narratives, community healing, and you talked about just reflection right there. So let's reflect on your story. So given the folks your background, can you just share with people who you are, where you're from, and then let's talk about the reflection piece of, as you reflect on your journey, what led you to giving birth to Create the Space?
Yeah. So many levels to this shit. I've lived many lives and died many deaths. And I think that's what's afforded me all of what I have today. So I'll give you the rigmarole quickly. I was a nerd to the fullest growing up. You know, I watched Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and all these things. I was an artist and a poet. I like to write. But over time, those things were socialized out of me. You can't be an artist. You won't make any money. You're not going to be a writer until you can't make money as a writer until you're dead. All of these things that kind of help, steer me in a different direction than were natural to me. But I became a mathematician, I was an engineer, and I was great at those things. You put your power, as a black person, we have that ability to just be great, so you put enough energy into it. So I did that, became an engineer. I went to college for that, then wanted to be a doctor, got into that space, volunteered, and then realized that this just wasn't it. It was like the energy wasn't right. The doctors that I interacted with, they were all unhappy. They didn't really feel like they were practicing the medicine that they really wanted to practice. And so steered away from that, became an engineer at Johnson & Johnson, did that for about 5 years. That wasn't it. Just didn't, that wasn't it. And then became a consultant after that, went back to business school. And I just found myself doing these things where it was like, set a goal, achieve it, realize that's not it. Set a goal, achieve it, realize that's not it. And then after so many trials at that, even when it comes to women and other aspects of my life, at 33 years old, I was just like, yo, wait a minute. The only constant in this equation is me, brother. And I'm the one. So at some point, I need to focus inward and focus on what it is about me that's causing all of these other situations to end in the way they are. Right. And so we talked about this year, right? I said, it's just like, all right, how do I really put my money where my mouth is? Okay, quit my job and invest that time and energy and money into myself. And so I did that. And that was hard. I was like, oh, I'm going to be in San Francisco, living in the most expensive place in the world or in the nation. Don't have a job, don't necessarily have a plan. But my plan was to invest in myself. It was like, I've been working so much, so hard for what if I can't invest in myself? And so that's what I did. And, like your story is it was so enlightening. It was just like, I had to find my voice. And really, that's what I was searching for, is a voice to feel and say and do the things that I wanted to do that were otherwise told not to do, Mm-hmm. And it started by finding my voice. And that's how Create the Space was born. It started with a program called To Me For You, where we started this storytelling platform. And we were just like, hey, brother, man, if you're Black, you got a story to tell. You're qualified to step on this stage. And we're just going to hear it. And we're going to hold it. And we're going to be there for you. We're going to support you, whatever that story is. And it was a foreign concept to people. And this is the space and the upbringing and the societal kind of oppression that we face, is that a space where you can be held and heard and supported as a Black man with no strings attached. It was foreign.
That's real. And what I want to stick with right there is a couple things. You talked about wanting to find your voice, and you were trying different things out. You were maybe climbing a ladder, accomplishing a goal. So through that journey, I'm wondering, what was the voice inside of you saying? Finally, you did get to fully express it in what you created, but what was tugging at you? What was the voice saying inside of you? Was there a feeling going on that it was something that internal that the outside couldn't, no matter what level of achievement you have, you weren't going to be fulfilled and satisfied? Was there something?
Yeah. Certainly. And so this is why I say the people that come to Create the Space have a question that they haven't articulated the words for, but they're seeking an answer to. And this is the space that I was in. And that's the best way I can say it, is because, at some point it's like, after so much, you have to start internalizing, looking inside. And when you do, there's no one else there to give you the answers. Right. And that's the hard part. And so when I was a kid, I used to tell my mother this. I was like, I didn't have the words for it, but I would say, Mom, I have this feeling. And I don't know what it is, but somehow it just feels like I'm not supposed to be here. Mm-hmm. And I would just say, like, Mom, I'm not supposed to be here. And she would just, kind of, what does that mean? Like, I don't know what that means. And for me, I really didn't know what it meant. And so after a while, I kind of stopped saying it. But I always had that feeling. And even in like corporate America, in some certain settings, in certain rooms, I walk in and I get this gut feeling, and it's just like, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, I'm here and I'm good at it, but I'm not supposed to be here. And after a while, that voice started just wanting to just come out. And some people, they translate that into rule breaking and being a rebel, right? Like breaking all the rules, smoking weed, dropping out of school, whatever the case may be, they translate that into some kind of outward expression. And sometimes it turns toxic. But if you focus inward and you give yourself the space and the grace, then you can turn that into something productive. And that's kind of where I was.
Man, yeah. That's a lot of that's really resonating with me, and all the layers that you talked about even earlier on when you were going through your background, or talking about some of the times this gets socialized out of us,
Hmm.
of being able to look inward, be in tune with our inner guides, and whether it's society, whether it's our upbringing, all of these things, or just we find a way to numb it
Hmm. For sure.
because it's such a foreign feeling or concept to us and we can't put a word on it. And there's something that a quote that I've heard you share that I wanted to just share with our audience is, pain is the difference between the way things are and the way things, well, the way we want them to be. So pain is the difference between the way things are and the way we want them to be. And you speak so much about how we can take our pain, well, we could take the uncomfort, that feeling,
Hmm.
and turn it into something.
Hmm.
So I guess, could you speak more about that quote that you've shared and how it's resonated with your journey?
Man, first of all, I got to give credit to my mother because she introduced me to a world of other things. I grew up Catholic. My grandmother was a devout Catholic. My mother was raised Catholic, but my mother was kind of that rebellious person. Like she was
Mm-hmm.
the person who, with her homegirls, went out to a club when she was young. She wasn't supposed to get in, and she hitchhiked to the club and then had to jump out of the back of a truck because they weren't going to take her where they wanted to go, kind of thing. Like that's where my mother was. So she was rebellious. And she tried everything. She read the Bible, she read the Quran, she got into metaphysics, she did all of the Buddhism, and she just explored. And she passed that exploration down to me. But amongst that, she also passed a lot of things. So
Me
she
too. Yeah.
introduced to me, and I can't remember if it was either Tony Spencer or Richard Bandler, but I wish that quote were mine. But it put so much into perspective for me. I was like maybe 12 years old. And as I grew, the more and more I experienced in life, the more it resonates with me. It's like just pain is simply the difference between where we are and where we want them to be. In the physical sense, you fall down, you bump your knee, you scrape it, you're bleeding. Damn, that pain is the difference between where you are presently and currently and where you actually wanted to be, which was going about your business. And that shit hurt,
Mm.
right? Not stumbling, not falling, not, you hit your knee and that was a message, that was information for you. And that pain, to your point, how do we use that and translate it? If we see the pain that we experience as information, then we can be informed and take action about that. And so much of what we think about pain is, oh, I want to avoid it. I want to dodge that, or I don't want to do that because that looks like it's painful. So we avoid the information that is afforded to us because of the pain or what we associate with pain, right? But so much that we're taught that we can overcome pain. We push past pain all the time, and it's a mental state. And so if we train ourselves to associate pain with information and knowledge and learning, then we can start looking at pain as another source of growth. And so things that hurt then become a challenge as opposed to, oh, that's painful, let me avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's, oh, damn, I've been through this before. That hurts. But what am I going to do differently this time? Right? How do I go through that knowing that what I did before didn't work, but I'm going to give it a chance and still know that I can come out successful on the other end? And so when we have a different relationship with pain altogether, then we start to approach life differently. And that pain is no longer inhibiting us through the fear of that pain. It's just information. And we can use
No,
it to our benefit.
I love that whole flipping it, pain, the definition of it, our narrative around it on its head. And as you mentioned, looking at it from information that can inform us, provide us with insight. However, to be honest, many of us don't have that level of awareness about pain for
Mm,
various reasons. And especially when it comes to pain, trauma, things of that nature that impact our mental well-being,
mm,
which we know mental health isn't a new term, but when it comes to dealing with mental struggles, emotions, we just don't even have the level of awareness to tap into, hey, this
right.
information can be used to aid me. And there's a stat that you shared about less than 50% of African Americans seek out mental health compared to their white counterparts. And less than 40% of Black men seek out mental health services. And as we think about the reasons, say, why we don't lean into this pain or the information that it can provide to us, I'm curious to hear, why do you feel many of us, whether it's just African Americans as a whole or men, don't feel safe enough to open up? Because those statistics are alarming, especially when this information that we could get could help us to get to the other side of pain and of trauma.
I say, well, when you're born and bred to be prize fighters, pain becomes your enemy.
Mm.
In every arena, that's how we're cast into the world. You have to be twice as good in every situation to be half as good as the normal population, you know? And so, you have to be strong, you have to be fast, you have to be quick, you have to be targeted, you have to go get it no matter what. You have to not show weakness because that's when the opposition is going to take you down. Like all of these things are ingrained in us to the point where socially, subconsciously, we don't even think about them in our interactions anymore. We just move. Like, for example, I have a friend he came into the creative space and he came to one of our events and he was over in the corner, like just, leaning back in the corner, kind of just laying the landscape and observing. And I talked to him about it and he was like, yo, man, that's just how I move. Like when I'm in a space where I don't know people, I got to see how every person interacts with other people before I interact with anybody because you never know who's trying to take you out, who's got secrets, and I'm just like, wow, like that's deep because
Mm-hmm.
I would have never come with that perspective. That's crazy, right?
No, that is deep. And like you said, there's just so much going on or pre-programmed into us
Mm-hmm.
that we're not able to develop that conscious. And so we have to work at it. Or what happens in the case of, for what you've created, we have to find a community that lets us know it is okay to engage in this exploration or diving into this pain. So I'd love to hear more about your insights of how we as men or as a larger community can become better allies, especially when it comes to helping men feel safe, to have the courage to once again lean into that pain in
Mm-hmm.
our feelings and our emotions. Like how can we as a communities be better allies to support especially men in that?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's no better way than to do it, which by that I mean lead with the spirit of what you're trying to create. And so with Create the Space, it's leading through shared vulnerability because what we put out, we get. And we believe that people connect in their truest forms when they're most vulnerable, right? You get to know somebody in their most nascent form when you're most vulnerable. And so in all of my interactions with Black men, that's how I lead. I tell some story, some truth, some openness about myself in order to set the foundation that, hey, this is what I'm about. So if you want to approach me on that wavelength, it's safe, right? And we don't have enough of that because in this world, everybody, and I do it too, depending on what space you're in, depending on what room you enter, depending on what people are around, you posture, you position yourself, you code switch, you level up, you whatever the case needs to happen, you do it so that you feel less uncomfortable. To your point originally, right? We avoid that discomfort, and when we do that, I think we miss out on a lot of opportunities to actually truly connect. And we're all guilty of it. And, we're not pointing fingers at this point, but the idea is to be aware and to be conscious and to rewrite the narratives, right? And so we talk about things like catch it, check it, change it, and just being more conscious of the reality of your own situation.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those tips and those tools that you just started to highlight. One that I really wanted to mine out because this process of getting to know ourselves, to becoming vulnerable with ourselves, if it's new to us, we need tools, we need strategies. And there is one that I've heard you reference as you did and starting to help us tap into our authentic self and desires. And so can you talk more about what you mean by catch it, check it, change it?
Yes. So first, let me give credit where credit is due. That came from my therapist, who I've been working with now for over almost 3 years. So for those of you who feel like therapy is not your thing, maybe you just haven't found the right therapist. But I promise you, everybody should have somebody to talk to. And so this came from her catch it, check it, change it, which is another way of just saying rewrite the narrative and untell the lies, right? It's like, okay, so many of us just overwhelm ourselves with these things that we tell ourselves that are not necessarily true. Oh, I'm broke or I can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that actually fact? Or are we just saying that circumstantially based on how we feel, right? And so much of what we project into the world is, from where we've come from, continuing to perpetuate where we are, that the narratives just get wiped. They get all washed into the same perpetual self-defeating, self-rejecting narrative. And the reality is, no, we're better than that. The reality is, no, that every day I get up and breathe, I have another opportunity to do different. The reality is that I have a community. The reality is that I have support, that I am loved. The reality is that I am able-bodied. And all of these things are possible. And I just have to shift the narrative and focus on what's real and stop telling myself these false narratives.
Yes. And that's something that we talk about on the show, Denzel. I appreciate you going into detail about that. Catch it, check it, change it. Is how do we start that process of changing those limiting beliefs? Because let's be honest, they don't go away. these are beliefs that we've had rooted in us since we were younger.
Mm-hmm.
That unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
the way our brains work, if we find a little inkling of something that confirms it and
Mm-hmm.
provides that
Mm-hmm.
evidence, it then further
Confirmation bias.
yes.
I
So I'm
knew
curious for you, in your journey, how have you continued other practices that have helped you to stay rooted in those times those limiting beliefs want to creep back up,
it. Mm-hmm.
that old narrative wants to resurface? Are there other strategies or approaches that you take to not reinforce it, but to combat it with whether it be self-love or wellness or whatever it might be to help you stay grounded and then keep making your progress go forward?
Yeah. All kinds of things. Let me try to stay focused because my mind just went off, like just all over the place. But like, we talked about pain, for example, and I'm very conscious of my surroundings. And so, like, for example, one thing that stood out to me is like if I'm stubbing my toe, like I'm very conscious of myself. And if I stub my toe, it usually happens and it will usually happen again or some repetitive thing. And so by the second time that I've stubbed my toe, I'm like, okay, I need to be more conscious of my movement, which means that perhaps I'm moving too fast, perhaps I'm overseeing something, or perhaps I just need to sit my ass down and think about my surroundings, not just in this moment, but in life, right? Because I believe we're conduits to a larger energy, right? And so this physical body of mine is simply going through what has already been positioned for me outside of my body, right? And so I'm experiencing it, and my body is a conduit to that information. So physically, like I look for signs all over the place. And if I stub my toe more than once, I'm like, okay, that's a sign. I think about the people that come into my life. Everybody, I believe, comes into my life for a reason, right? And then if I focus enough energy onto the reason or the why, the learning from that interaction, I feel like those things tend to bring me very poignant information. Every interaction. And somebody once told me that every person you know knows something that you don't know. So don't discount anybody. And that really hit home for me because I will walk down the street and if a homeless person has a conversation with me, I'm talking to that person because they took the time to focus their energy on me, whether it be coherent or not. Somebody said something to me the other day. He was like, you walk with Jesus or something like this. The dude was probably on drugs, crazy, whatever the case may have been. But I know that message was for me. You know what I mean? And I fully believe that when we start to slow down and really focus on the things that truly matter to us, I'm an earth water person. And so my sign, for example, is another one. I know we want to talk about that. I look at those things too. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't been in touch with the earth in so long. Mm-hmm. So I'm not grounded. I'm not rooted. I'm not entrenched in where I came from. I need to go back to the earth. I had an energy healer one time tell me, I asked her, I was like, yo, sometimes I just get the urge to lay down on the floor. Like I'll be on the bed and I just get out of the bed and I'll be like, yo, I need to be on the floor. And she looked at me and she was like, you're an earth sign. That makes complete sense. Sometimes your polarity is unbalanced and you need to be as close to the poles as possible. And being in the earth is recentering, is regrounding. It brings you balance. And so now I'm like, oh, I haven't been barefoot in a while. Let me go walk outside. Let me go catch some sun because I need that nurturing. Oh, let me go to the water because I'm half earth, half water sign and I need to be by the water's edge. And so these things start to bring more consciousness to me. And some people will be like, oh, that's frou-frou, whatever. Mm-hmm. I was like that too until I started to pay attention.
That's powerful stuff. I appreciate you taking it there because you blew my mind and expanded my mind. And you say like everyone you meet, you can learn something from. When it comes to respect to you talking about energy, our signs, our astrological DNA, I want to stay there too for a moment and just hear you share more about how you coming and learning and understanding once again your astrological DNA in your journey of healing and self-acceptance. And like you were just saying, just being able to walk around in fullest and truest version of yourself.
Oh man, there's just so much knowledge out there. And, it's foolish for anyone to think that they've learned anything in this world. But at the same time, we've been born and we've been bred with everything within us that we need to make this life possible. And so we have all the tools within us. It's been transcribed in our DNA. As humans, our nature is to evolve. So you see people who worked in the cotton fields and their hands are thick and strong because their skin naturally evolved to protect themselves from the thorns. You see swimmers with broad shoulders and long arms and long torsos because they've evolved to be able to master that craft. Right. And so our bodies on the most microscopic level are continuously taking in the environment and saying, how can I get better tomorrow? How can I do this better as a biological self? And then your body evolves in that way. And so too we are as people. And I think the more information that we have about ourselves, the better we are able to evolve. And so when you think about the planet, it would be foolish of us to not think those things influence us, right?
Mm.
And reading how generations have done it before us, and that knowledge continues to pass down about astrological signs and energy and healing, and how everything at one point was done through nature. And in this Western society, now we have everything that's synthesized and fabricated to resemble or to mimic or to do something in synthesis of something else. But nothing is real. This whole world is a distraction, right? It's a facade. It's fabricated. But underneath all of that, there is real earth. There's real water. There's real connectivity. There's real people. There's real energy. There's real intent. And intention matters, right? And so where we put we put our energy, our focus, that's where our bodies and our evolution is going to go. And if I'm fully intending on being the best person that I can be for you as a brother, for myself as a brother, and for myself as a physical entity to heal, then that's where my energy is going to go. And I can only beget more energy from that, you know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, this is some good stuff and some powerful stuff. And I like how you also were just talking about how we sometimes get out of touch with nature, which is easy because we live in, like you were saying, this generation where everything's on our phones and we're in front of screens all day more than ever now. And being able to reconnect back with that, how beneficial it could be to so many layers to ourselves. I also want to talk about something you shared about how just the humility. I think that's something that stands out. A trait that you have is the humility around you to connect with people. You talked about you'll have a conversation with one of our displaced neighbors or anyone else out there. One of the poison pill, but one of the things that can prevent us also from this living the truest expression of ourselves and getting out of our own way is our ego.
Mm.
And I'm curious of what's your take on ego? Do you use your ego in alignment with you? I mean, we've had Harvey on who talked about ego. So I'm curious of how can we learn to get out of our own way when it comes to our egos, which can really block and hinder us, especially if we're on a path of healing or once again trying to become the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, the ego is so funny as a concept because it's like it's there, but it's not really there, but it's how we process, but it's talking to us, but it's like reflecting us. It's like it was one of these things. But I love it because as we evolve, so does our ego. And so does our relationship to it. And, you know, I'm 37 now. At 33 years old, as I started working with Create the Space, founding Create the Space and myself and all of this stuff, I thought I wanted to conquer my ego. I thought I wanted to, you know, kill the ego and get it. Mm-hmm. But I recognize the ego serves a purpose, right? The ego is that by which we process and filter and we project and we process. And so it's up to us to be able to fine tune and manage the ego because the ego will do us a service if we're connected with it, if we are conscious of it, if we know what it does well and what it doesn't do well, right? Just like a partner, if we know what they do well and what they don't do well, we can work better with that, right? But we have to see it for the totality of what it is. But it is one of those things that definitely in our earlier stages of life has like full reins of control, the things that we do and the outcomes that we realize. And so, you know, it's a huge point that I love to address with people because even as I talk about it, my ego is coming into play, right? So it's a constant thing that you just evolve with and you have to just continue to level up.
Yeah, I'm on that. I think I read The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday and just beginning to learn and understand. And once again, the more we understand, like you've hit on so many times in this interview, the more information and insight we have, the better we're able to equip ourselves to take action, to manage things. So that's.
But just here, kind of, I don't even say if it's a tip, but I realize like one of the things that does me service as an individual is acknowledging my ego, right? Mm-hmm. Like giving it presence, giving it realness, giving it, and maybe you can go so far as giving it a name. I know somebody who gives their ego a name and they call it what it is. You know, it's like, oh, Felicia's coming out again.
Gotcha.
You know? Yeah. And it's like, okay, so I have that, and it's not a struggle for me to acknowledge that because I can just, you know, it is what it is, and I have a relationship with it, and it's there. You know, and I'm not supposed to be afraid of it. I have to relate to it, and if you can humanize it. This is why the power of voice is so important, and so much of our programming is around finding your voice. Because if you can voice it, then it's one step closer to becoming real or manageable or something that you can conquer if you need to conquer it, right? And so the ego is the same way. Have a relationship with it. I think talking out loud and being able to, don't take yourself so seriously and have fun with it.
Yeah, now you just gave me a little insight there. I'm like, oh, I might have to, drop a name on my ego or something like that. So
Yeah. You're like, all right, bro,
different way
come
of
on.
acknowledging yourself. But I appreciate you saying though, like if we call it out, put it on the table, and acknowledge that it exists, we can work with it,
Yeah,
and use it to serve us.
yeah.
You know,
It's
I
like you
love
got
that.
somebody else in the room with you. It's like you got two of you now. It's like, all right,
Yeah,
players, like, how we gonna do this?
yeah, yeah. And that once again can serve to benefit us, just knowing that and having that. Earlier on, we talked about statistics around mental health, and then
Mm,
just when some of the foundational elements of Create the Space revolve around mental wellness. And you did talk about your own therapeutic journey. So what I'm curious about for you, because we know whether it's in Black culture,
mm,
other communities of culture of color may deal with this, where therapy as a tool, it's not something we grew up talking about in the household.
mm,
We came from households where there was another approach to dealing with struggle and pain and
mm.
things of that nature. So I'm curious for you, what was your journey like into therapy? Was it something that you hesitated into, really allowed you to see the value in using that?
Yeah, even my current relationship with therapy is an interesting one. I'll get back to that. I was fortunately and unfortunately, when I was young, my mother, as a young man in the house, and my father and my mother divorced. My mother started dating somebody else, and I was rebellious. And so during that phase, it was like 8 to 12, 14. She was like, yo, I got to take you to a therapist. Like, you're acting out, you're doing all kinds of crazy shit, and this is going to happen whether you like it or not. So you going to see a therapist. And so I saw a therapist at a young age, and, I fought it, but it wasn't a foreign concept to me. And so
Mhm.
that was reintroduced to me, many times during my life. Fortunate credit to my mother. Even with that soft, it wasn't soft, but over the course of, my multiple experiences, I was soft. Introduction to therapy, the therapeutic world, I'm still resistant, kind of like yoga. I was like very resistant to yoga in all my
Mhm.
experiences with yoga until I found the practitioner that I was like, yo, I vibe with you. Yeah, my therapeutic experience had always been, I didn't feel centered. I didn't feel heard or felt or related to. I felt, studied. And in many ways, that was dissuading to me. And so much of our, history is rooted in like therapy being used as a weapon. And so it was just never open to me. And even today, I found a great therapist. It was a lifelong pursuit of me just trying it over different courses, stages of my life. And I found one based on a recommendation that somebody gave to me. A Black person was like, yo, try my therapist. She's also Jamaican and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yo, that's wow. Like, okay, cool. Because I'm Jamaican. I was like, yo, that's an instant connection. Let me try this person. And she's been my therapist for over 3 years now. And I advocate for therapy all the time at my events and with people and just in conversation. But at the same time, in my own evolution, I'm like, therapy is kind of old school. Therapy was handed to us in the form that we know it today. The DSM-4, like even that is like westernized. And it's like nobody wants to be categorized in that book.
Oh, what's the DSM-4? Just for context, I don't even know what that is.
I'm going to bastardize the enunciation of it or what it actually means. So we're just going to leave it at that. But it's the therapeutic book where all of your classifications exist, right? And so
Okay.
it's like this thick is you can stand on it, and they revise it every so often. But they just have hundreds of thousands of therapeutic classifications for all of these diseases and associations and mental things, and it's a big Bible of therapy. But that's all been taught to us in a very particular way, and it doesn't take into consideration us. And by us, I mean very concisely Black people. We were treated as test subjects for these therapeutic diagnostics. We weren't treated as the founding people. And so even therapy by its traditional nature is a little bit assimilated. And so I have something against that and the language that comes with it. Like as a person, I prefer to go see a healer, or anything, or a spiritual guide or an ancestral guide or something like this, knowing that they still have the ability to walk me through my challenges, right? And so reframing the narrative altogether and what my life and what I want it to look like is a part of this journey, because so much of it has been prescribed to me that I feel like I have to go to a therapist, and I felt like I had to go to college, and I felt like I had to go get married, and I felt like I had to have a 401k and all these things that were told to me But if I step out of this reality, it's completely different elsewhere, and it's completely different elsewhere. And so it's like, well, if everybody has just made up their and fabricated their own rules and their own reality, then why not focus on what I want my rules to be for myself?
Oh, I love that. That is what we are about here, is that aspect of the rewriting. I talked in this earlier seasons about thinking, yeah, there was one way to go about living a life and not knowing and really defining what success meant,
Mm-hmm.
fulfillment, joy. And even you talk about your journey into therapy, because one of the things I was going to ask you was like, hey, I'm sure you probably come across folks who say like, that's not really for me. But you just gave within that, there are other outlets to still find to process struggle,
For sure.
emotions, pain. You talk about, healers and just there's other practitioners
For
or ways that
sure.
you can go about using it.
For sure, for sure. I encourage people to try it, even if it's outside the box by Western standard, because most shit is. But it works. There's a reason why Chinatown has its Chinese doctors, and they go to see their healers, and but they're not going to see regular doctors like Western medicine, right? And so it's just like open your eyes up to the idea that more exists, and you can create a different reality if you choose to, starting with the medicine that we put, or the food that we put in our body for that matter, right? And so being introduced to, let me step back. I'm in California. Let me just give context. I grew up in Florida, moved all over the place, ended up in California 5 years ago this month. I celebrated that on Instagram not long ago. And I saw a funny saying on Instagram. It was like, live in New York, but move before you get too hard. Live in San Francisco, but move before you get too soft. And I think I understand it in so many contexts, but being out here in the Bay has changed my life and my perspective on what wellness and health and all of these things look like. San Francisco, I will go on record and say I think is a failure of a city, but I think the West Coast definitely has something when it comes to being out in the sunshine, the resources, where they're putting their money in terms of advocacy, mental health, and all of these things. Cultural pride that we have for the little black people that we have. Oakland is the shit. And so all of these things come together in a spiritual wave that I think doesn't exist in a lot of places. And so I'm riding that wave for sure. And so when I talk like this, it's like, okay, I have the freedom to talk like this, because in so many places you go and talking like this and you're like, yo, that dude is tripping. Like, right. But that's also a challenge. That's a challenge that we're working against, right? Is being able to pull people to a higher resonant frequency.
Yeah. And going back to the food piece, because food science is something that I've been starting to explore more, and the way that it impacts our body, what we're putting in. I'm very curious of your journey into that. Is that just been a part of coming to California? Are you more mindful?
Man, you know what it is a journey in being an adult, being a man, a black man. It's so much combined and intertwined. But I was proud, actually. And this is the shit. This is the shit that we grow up with. I was actually so proud to be a black man that could drink milk, that I drank milk just because I was proud of it. You know what I mean? And I think I was 31 years old, 32 years old before I started questioning my drinking of milk. But it was just like source of protein. Milk does the body good and it's strong for your bones and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't give me the bubble guts. So I was like, oh, you can't drink milk? Well, yeah, I can drink it. So I'm going to drink it. But then I realized I actually suffered a lot as I got older with a lot of challenges with sinuses. And it got worse and worse and progressively worse. And I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. And they told me all kinds of things. Like I had to have nasal surgery because I have a deviated septum, have a stent put in, or all kinds of craziness. It's just like they were never like going to be able to solve it. They just wanted to try to do something. And I moved out to California, and I had a conversation with a Eastern medicine, holistic medicine, functional doctor. And she was just like asking me about my diet and my practices. And she was like, oh, but you eat a lot. You say you eat a lot of dairy. And I was like, yeah, but I'm good. I'm not lactose intolerant. And so she was like, yeah, you might not be, but you say you have a lot of sinus issues, and dairy is like one of the number one inflammatories to the body. And so you could be suffering from a reaction to the dairy that's outside of your lactose. You might be lactose tolerant. And so she put me on a 3-week dairy diet. And I promise you, 2 weeks into that diet, everything changed for me. My nasal passages cleared up. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, like asphyxiating, coughing, stifling myself because I couldn't breathe. It's just 2 weeks later, I stopped dairy and I was like, my life changed from that moment. I was 34 years old, 35 years old at that time. I was like, yo, well, you are what you eat. Seriously, like, I have to be very conscious of it because my body responds very vividly to what I put into it. And it started with the dairy, but then I started experimenting with so many other things. And I just found so much about my body that I just had no consciousness of. Like, oh shit, this is like going to school for the first time and learning your ABCs. You know what I mean?
Wow. And I'm just reaching the surface level of some of that awareness, but hearing you say at the end there, you are what you eat, and how so many of us, we don't have a consciousness. And when we would go to school, we would just eat whatever they would give to us. And, based on our culture and different things of that nature, like we don't have any of that insight or connection. But as we do become consciously aware of it, it's another thing that we're able to just use as that information as a tool.
Yeah, and your body will tell you if you listen, bro. Like, so much of it is just in our ignorance to our own intimacy. Like, we're just not intimate with ourselves, so we just blow by all of the signals. And then as men, we're socialized to be like, oh, we're in pain. Work through that, work it out. No pain, no gain, you know? But no, these are signals from your body to tap in and do something different, is what they're trying to tell you. And when we get better at that, and I credit my women for this so much, because as a counterpart, they see the things we don't see because we haven't been socialized or trained to do those things. But they have. That's where they're much more nurturing in many senses, the female energy, the female spirit, because they're conscientious of so much that, and we do it to ourselves. It's self-rejection at its finest.
And that interdependentness of needing everybody, like you said, our male, our female counterparts. And so before we get to the each one teach one, I want to bring it all full circle about the community once again that you have created organically, and seeing this come together over the years in your work doing this. I'm curious, Denzel, of what has it been like for you now, seeing this community grow and strengthen and evolve and level up together as everyone's been on this journey with you?
Oh man, it's a dream come true, and I'm trying not to be trite when I say that, but literally had a dream, and now I'm like in it, right? And it's like I just wanted to create a space where I could be held and heard and say what I gotta say, and found other people who felt the same way, and then wanted to build a community of like-minded people who could grow strength, and together in numbers. And now we're here. We're here. That's a dream, literally come true. And just being able to tap in with individuals and see my own reflection in them selfishly. I sound very selfish in this explanation, but honestly, like, all this world's a stage and everybody in it is a projection. And I feel like I'm just trying to create relationships that I can find in other people to further my own expansion and my own growth. And because of that, and because we're able to do it with the resources that we have, with the people that we have, doing it in the likeness that we are, it just feels so much better. This is the community that I want to be a part of, And it's like, oh, every new personality, every new person, and every new energy that comes into it, it's a new service to me. It's a new service level, because of trying to understand people for authentically where they are and who they are. There's no one answer for that. And so the community grows and evolves, and it changes faces all the time. It's huge. Yeah, it's awesome. And so on this micro level, people are like, oh yeah, you have a small community, but no, it's a living organism, and everything starts small. And we touch so many people on a regular basis, and so much has transformed the spontaneous combustion of the interactions and the births and the relationships and the job opportunities and the network and the healing and the growth. You can't quantify any of it. And I'm sitting right at the middle of it.
It's incredible, and it's powerful to be a part of, and to see evolve and to share with people. So once again, just power to you, brother, for bringing this to the world and bringing this to life here. Seriously.
Thank you. And now I'm starting to realize, like, the beauty of it is not actually me doing the work so much anymore. It's me inviting other people who have brilliant things to offer to the community, like this, like you, Justin. Like, this podcast is amazing, and so many people have an outlet to share their story because of it. And I think there's just a ripe line of folks who just continue to want to tell their story. And so it's just a natural fit, because for us, by us. That's how that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Love that reference there. So Denzel, the next part of our conversation is going to be each one, teach one. These are rapid fire questions. So I'm just going to give you some questions. I actually just baked up another one I wanted to ask you. So we're going to do 5 for this one, bro.
Okay.
So first question, and you just share what comes to your mind. What's one book or habit that has been impactful for you that you would recommend to folks?
Man, okay, so many, but I'm going to talk about this month. We're working on relationships at Create the Space. So We're going to talk about The Spirit of Intimacy by Sobonfu Some, excuse me. Great book around Western culture looks at relationship versus how African culture looks at relationship and why so many of us fail in relationships today. And, that one was hugely inspirational for me because it gives you a historical reference to how relationships were in the past and then gives you a spiritual connection to why relationships were that way. And then you see how it's played out in today's society and where we are today. And it's just like mind blowing from an African diasporic perspective. And I was like, you can't be better than this. It's a great book for people looking to understand themselves in relation to someone else.
Yep, keeps with that theme of knowing thyself.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one is, if you could create one law or policy that everyone had to abide by, what would it be and why?
Man, that's a tough one. Because I'd be on this whole, maybe I'm not a politician for this reason, but I'm like, no, one size doesn't fit all. But I would say you got to go back to the golden rule, man. It's like you treat others the way you want to be treated. And then I think maybe you would add to the golden rule. It's just like, and be very transparent with communication, right? Because if your intent is to treat others the way you want to be treated and you like to be treated a certain way, then communicate that, and I can decide whether I want to fucks with you or not.
Well, yep. It's all out there on the table. I get that.
Yeah, and then we can go from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to take them to school on this next one. This is one of my favorites. So what's one thing that you believe should be taught in school that's not currently taught?
I think one thing that should be taught in school that's currently not taught is probably commit science. I think maybe that's even doing an injustice, but having an understanding of ancient sciences that came from Black culture that existed before the first quote unquote known presence of white man is hugely impactful to our ancestry, right? So we call things science today because it's been approved by some organization or some methodology. But the reality is we know less than 1% of 1% of what there is to know. Right. And so even science is, wildest imagination, a good guess, right? We discover new particles, new things all the time. And so who's to say where science begins and ends and where did people start and where did we end? But if we have what tools today they say and suggest that science should say where we came from, we got to look at that stuff. And all of those things has information. All of those things, those nuggets of information are vital to our ability to tap in and use the resources that we were given on our God-given ability to do what we got to do. There's no reason why, for example, I went to Jamaica and I've been estranged from my father. He's, divorced my mother when I was 5 years old. But went back to find him and talked and found, cousins and uncles and found out that pretty much everybody on my father's side, my father is a singer and an artist. My uncle's an artist and an athlete. And everybody on my side is either in some combination of athlete and artist, whether it be paint or sketch art, music. We're just a family of artists. And it's also, my father saw a tattoo on my rib and he was like, yo, that's beautiful. Where did you get it? And I told him I drew it. And he was like, I had no idea you were an artist. That runs in your family, right? Just being able to tap into that and be like, wow, had I been able to use that so long ago to know that that was a skill that was natural. And then I knew it, but we talked about it in the beginning. Like these things weren't encouraged. These things were socialized out of me as a being an artist. It came naturally. I put paper to pen and things come out, but then people tell you that you're not supposed to do that. Right. Mm-hmm. And then to come back 35 years later or 30 years later and be like, damn, like this is a natural born God-given talent that runs through years of lineage. The ancestors have been speaking to me and I didn't even know that. Wow. And that's a shame to be ignoring those voices,
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. What a journey right there. So our next one is Denzel. So if you had all of the resources on the planet, so people, money, time, what would be your passion project? What would you bring to life in the world?
Oh, man. If I had all the resources in the world, the first thing I would say is I'd be distracted. But I think my project would be how do we, and you see this in some other things, but like retro, like everything retro is becoming a thing now. How do we get back to less distractions? I would figure out how we can empower people to be their most natural selves in a way that doesn't harm the earth. Technology is great, but we're, catastrophic to the world right now. And so many people are focused on building outwards and expanding and growing and more technology and more this and that. But we're losing focus on what really matters, which is this inner locus of control and growth and expansion inwards. Mm-hmm. And so, how do we give people the tools that incentivize them to do just that? Right? Give them some sort of widget, some sort of fun game, some sort of infrastructure to look inward and be better people. And we have some of those things, but nothing's working, right? Everybody's driven by the dollar bill. So maybe if health and wellness was the currency, then we would be doing something different.
Well said with that one, Denzel. And so our last question for you is this. This is a question we're asking all the guests this upcoming season. If you could go back and talk to your 20-year-old self about taking risks in life and give yourself one piece of advice, what would you have said?
Man, I have this conversation often. I mean, people will be like, yo, your 20-year-old self ain't gonna listen to shit you gonna say. Which in many ways is true, but I would just say, just do it. Like the whole Nike commercial, because in many ways, all of the things that I've questioned are the things that I naturally wanted to do and decided not to for some other external reason. And I would just go back and be like, yo, believe in yourself and just do it. And you will get some outcome. It might not be great, but you will have done it and you will have felt proud of for doing it, and that I think the confidence that those decisions build over time, when you give yourself the space to just do and then fail or succeed and then get up and do and fail and succeed and over again and not have somebody trying to hold you up and cast you in a net or whatever the case may be, you build a confidence that's insurmountable compared to other, feats and challenges. And so that I think is huge.
Yeah, and you can learn through success and failure, right, and use that toward your benefit. So, listen, I had to have you on here to let people into your genius. And so, can you share with the folks what's next for you and where can they go to find you and learn more?
Yeah, man. Well, this is just the beginning. Talk about humility. I don't really brag too much, but I really believe that we're building a movement here. And so what's next looks maybe like a stepping stone in the trajectory. We're building out this membership. We're working on our partnerships to start solidifying our relationships here in Alameda County, but also nationally. So we're expanding. We're trying to grow our membership across the nation, but we're also working on a proprietary curriculum that we're going to share with the world and spread our voice and our ideology in a way that really is going to send a beacon for individuals. I'm not going to say all Black people because no Black person is a monolith, but there aren't enough beacons and flagships to say put your Blackness and your Black self forward first, right? And here's a place where we're all doing that, so come do it with us.
Love that. I love that. And then anything you want to share too about like websites?
URLs, yeah, absolutely. So in the next 3 weeks, we have another To Me For You, Stories of Self-Exploration from the Heart coming up. This is going to be probably the last one that's out in Defirmary Park. So for folks here out in Oakland in the Bay Area, please come through. It's on September the 15th, if I'm not mistaken. It's the third Thursday of September, and it's at 5:30. You can find that information on our website at www.createthespace.com, and I'll spell it for you. That's CR8 thespace.com. Or that information is always prevalent on Instagram. Try to come follow us. Create CREAT_the_space. And that's where you'll find all of our information about our membership, our programs, our offerings, our get-togethers, our kick-its, our ideology, everything.
Yeah, and so much more. And folks, there you have it. Once again, Denzel, you've been a pioneer, I feel, in this space, creating this new frontier of wellness for people of color, men of color, especially Black and brown, as we try to rewrite our narratives around mental health, healthy relationships, community, and reinventing ourselves so that we could embrace the fully self-actualized version of ourselves that lives deep inside of us. But once again, we've kept suppressed. And so you're helping all of us one by one pull it out. And as each of us do it, we're able to cast that spider web further. So thank you again for just being such an aid on my journey. And I just want to thank you and listeners, regardless of your gender. We could all take something away from Denzel's insight to aid you in your journey again of healing, self-acceptance, exploration, and then walking into the truest version of ourselves. So thank you again for this time, brother.
Ashe, these words are so spiritual to me. They move me in ways you don't understand. So thank you so much for having me, inviting me as a guest, and all my craziness and things that I envision. I couldn't do it without you and your support and your energy and your fellowship, brother. So thank you so much. I will say for the ladies who have been listening to this, please, please, please encourage your men to continue to stand in their vulnerability. When you show up in the world differently, the world is forced to respond differently. So please be gracious as we work through these challenges as men and show up and receive us. We should and deserve to be received. And you can also bring another guy to this platform. So many of us need this work, this healing. We don't even recognize it. So if you recognize it, lead us to the water. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that part because ladies are well ahead of us in this journey. So for them to kind of help us, get our stuff together, appreciate you emphasizing that. So folks, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for your presence and tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please show your support by sharing the Living Once Twice podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or wherever, and also leaving us a review on iTunes. Once again, reaching out to you all through the time and the space that separates us to say, remember, your dream life is waiting for you. Go for it. You deserve it. Catch you later on Living Once Twice.